When the world looks at Africa, it sees resources, it sees markets, it sees strategic value. And that is why global powers are drawn to the continent. China is already there, so is Turkey and the West. But now India is also making its presence felt.
They said Africa couldn't build. They said Africans could only buy, borrow, or beg. They laughed at the very idea of African factories, African engineers, and African power. But the world is about to learn a hard truth. Africa is done waiting for permission. While the so-called developed nations drown in bureaucracy and arrogance, Africa is quietly welding its own destiny together, piece by piece, bolt by bolt, and now, with India opening its first ever overseas defense plant, not in Europe or America but in Morocco, the message couldn't be clearer. Africa is no longer the testing ground. It's the launchpad. In a move that has shaken global defense circles, India has partnered with Morocco to establish the largest defense manufacturing facility in North Africa, located in the industrial zone of Berekhet, near Casablanca. On a breezy September morning, the event made headlines across continents. India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh stood alongside Morocco's Minister Delegate for National Defense Abdeltif Laoudi as the two nations unveiled the massive 20,000 square meter facility. Run by Tata Advanced Systems Limited (TASL), the defense arm of India's industrial giant, Tata Group. It's not just another factory. It's India's first defense plant outside Asia, built and operational 3 months ahead of schedule. And what it produces has stunned the old powers of the West. Because this factory doesn't make consumer goods or electronics. It builds weapons, advanced, modular, wheeled armored platforms known as the WAP 8x8, co-developed by India's Defense Research and Development Organization (DRDO). These vehicles are designed for multi-terrain warfare, capable of protecting troops, carrying heavy equipment, and surviving blasts and ambushes. They're built not in Pune or Hyderabad, but right here in Africa. For the first time in modern history, Africa is part of the global defense supply chain, not as a buyer, but as a builder. For decades, Africa's defense story was written elsewhere. In Washington, Paris, and Moscow, the continent bought its weapons but had no control over how they were made, maintained, or priced. Every gun, every tank part, every software update had to be imported. That dependence came at a cost. Sovereignty. But in Berekhet, that story flipped overnight. Initial deliveries of the WAP 8x8 to Morocco's Royal Armed Forces are scheduled to begin within weeks. And this is just the first phase. Future production will include specialized variants for peacekeeping, reconnaissance, and command operations, designed not only for Morocco but for other African and European clients. For Morocco, this partnership is a masterstroke. It positions the country as a regional defense hub, capable of producing advanced military vehicles without relying on Western intermediaries. For India, it marks a new milestone in its Make with Africa strategy, expanding the spirit of its Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, campaign beyond its borders. But beyond trade and industry, this collaboration signals something deeper: a reordering of global power. Because when one country builds weapons on African soil, others will follow. When one nation treats Africa as a collaborator instead of a client, the rest of the world must rethink its approach. So why Morocco? Why not Kenya, Nigeria, or South Africa? The answer lies in strategy. Over the past 2 decades, Morocco has quietly built itself into Africa's most underestimated industrial powerhouse. While other nations focused on resources, Morocco invested in infrastructure and credibility. It transformed its ports into global trade arteries, its highways into export corridors, and its industrial parks into magnets for international partnerships. The Tangier Med port is now one of the largest in the Mediterranean, connecting Africa to more than 180 global destinations. From that position, Morocco doesn't just sit on the map, it controls access to Europe, the Atlantic, and the Mediterranean. India saw what others missed. The Berekhet facility isn't just about Morocco, it's about placing India's manufacturing footprint at the bridge between Africa and Europe. Through Morocco, India can ship defense products north to Europe, west to the Americas, and south across Africa, all without crossing politically unfriendly routes. But geography wasn't the only reason Morocco offered trust, stability, and efficiency. Under King Mohammed VI, Morocco has maintained a politically stable and investment-friendly environment. It's home to global manufacturers like Renault, Peugeot, and Boeing, all drawn by Morocco's reliable workforce and logistics. India didn't need a country full of speeches. It needed a country that could deliver results. And Morocco delivered. There's also a philosophical Connection. Both India and Morocco share a history of non-alignment, of forging independent paths between East and West. This partnership wasn't born from dependency, but from shared independence. In many ways, it represents the new Africa, one that trades horizontally instead of vertically, one that builds partnerships on equality instead of subservience. Morocco's leaders understand that industrialization is the new sovereignty. They've built training programs, modern banking systems, and transparent frameworks that make high-tech partnerships possible. And now, Africa finally has access to defense technology without colonial contracts or political lectures. The Berekhet facility will transfer knowledge, train technicians, and create a skilled local workforce. For Morocco, that's technological dignity. For India, it's proof that collaboration can replace coercion. Inside the factory, something remarkable is taking shape: the WAP 8x8, the symbol of a new defense era. This isn't just a machine. It's a statement. Built for deserts, jungles, and mountains alike, the WAP 8x8 can adapt to any African battlefield. It's modular, meaning it can switch from troop carrier to command unit, reconnaissance vehicle, or ambulance in hours. It runs on a 600 horsepower Cummins engine, reinforced with modular composite armor, and a V-shaped hull that absorbs explosions from landmines and IEDs. It's designed for African conditions, rugged, adaptable, and reparable on local soil. 35% of its parts are already sourced within Morocco, with that number expected to rise to 50%. This isn't outsourcing, it's industrial integration. And that changes everything. Because when a continent begins building the vehicles that defend it, it starts rewriting the psychology of power. For the first time, African soldiers will drive machines built by African engineers. The WAP 8x8 also represents a South-South defense doctrine. Nations of the Global South cooperating to secure themselves without asking for Northern approval. This single factory could spark a continent-wide industrial awakening. Ghana is already exploring co-development of light armored vehicles. Kenya is looking to integrate Indian drone systems. Egypt is pushing to move from assembling foreign weapons to building its own. Slowly, a new map is emerging, not of colonized supply lines but of African production corridors. But the true revolution is psychological. For decades, Africa's development narrative revolved around farming, tourism, and minerals. No one spoke of defense as an industrial opportunity. It was taboo. Now that taboo is gone. The Berekhet facility proves that Africa can build defense industries transparently, ethically, and profitably. IT creates jobs, trains engineers, and inspires innovation that will spill into sectors like robotics, logistics, and aerospace. For Africa's youth, it's a message of confidence. When they see armored vehicles rolling out of Moroccan factories, they're not just seeing machines, they're seeing possibility. Of course, the old powers aren't happy. Western defense contractors are already lobbying African governments to stick with trusted suppliers. Banks warn about dual-use technology. It's the same fear tactics used for decades to keep Africa dependent. But Africa's new generation of leaders, from Ouagadougou to Rabat, aren't buying it. They've seen what dependence costs: sovereignty, policy freedom, and dignity. This time, partnerships with India, Turkey, and China aren't about replacing one master with another. They're about removing masters altogether. And that's the quiet revolution taking place in Morocco. It's not about competing with Western powers, it's about building an African ecosystem of strength where Africans design, assemble, and defend on their own terms. Because once Africa proves it can industrialize the most complex and regulated sector of all, military technology, the door to every other industry opens wide: aviation, space, energy. It all begins here. So when the first WAP 8x8s roll out of Berekhet under the Moroccan sun, they carry more than troops. They carry hope, the long-delayed merging of African talent, resources, and destiny. History may look back at this moment as the dawn of Africa's industrial century, when the continent finally stopped asking for protection and began building it. Do you think Morocco's defense revolution marks Africa's first true step toward independence from Western control? Share your thoughts in the comments about African innovation, history, and power.